All right. So, hi everyone. Thank you for being here. Good to see you all. And just because everyone here was here last week, except Ardell. Hi, Ardell.
And Anne.
But I think you've had a
and Anne.
And Anne, I'm sorry, of course. And Anne, sorry. Ardell, you may have had some behind the scenes editing and listening practice or insight already, maybe. But just to go over kind of briefly about what we covered last week, if you didn't get the chance to see the recording, and I definitely encourage you to watch it just because we shared a lot of our learnings over the past few months. But we talked about how the Outreach and Advocacy team's learning has been kind of founded upon pieces existing theological framework of understanding our place and our movement in the world. So that a part of that is included in chapter 4 of the Statement of Purpose. I'll just read a snippet here. Among other things, it says that the church shall serve in response to God's love to human needs, caring for the sick and the aged, advocating dignity and justice for all people, working for peace and reconciliation among the nations, and standing with the poor and powerless, and committing itself to their needs. And we will respond to human need, work for justice and peace, care for the sick and suffering, and participate responsibly in society. So that framework was already, hi Carmelo, that framework was already in place, and that kind of, again, provided the foundation for what we were learning and helped us apply what we were learning about community initiatives and organizations to our work as a church together. We also covered what direct service and advocacy are, each of those things. Peace has long participated in many ongoing and one-time direct service efforts, including the ACA food pantry, or collecting food to give to the pantry. The homework club is another example. Christmas gifts to Village of Hope. Those are all direct service efforts. Advocacy, we've had some relationship with like VICPP, which we'll talk about more, and also Bread for the World, but more so as kind of small movements within the church, not necessarily as a congregation collectively. So I would like to turn now, that was kind of the brunt of what we covered in our first section. Today, we would like to ask you what your thoughts are about advocacy. How do you define advocacy? And I'm going to, hopefully everyone can see this, and I'm going to kind of jot it down here as we go.
When you think about advocacy, what comes to mind?
Championing.
Go ahead.
Championing a right.
Championing a right. Okay.
Being a voice for people that wouldn't otherwise have one.
Policy change.
Highlighting social justice concerns in our community.
What was the first word you said, Jen?
Highlighting.
This is fun, but it's not necessarily that easy. Sorry.
Influence, like influencing others.
Any last thoughts?
Looking at the root of problems.
The roots of problems.
Roots of problems, yes. And
That's really neat technology, Nadia.
Thanks. I discovered it recently, so I'm still practicing. It's just actually Microsoft Word Draw, if you're interested.
Nice. I would like to add the word responsibility. I think that advocacy is not a privilege of a few. I think it's a responsibility of citizens in a democracy.
was that you, Ardell, that wanted to add something?
No.
No, okay. Thought I heard you.
Any last thoughts?
I have something in the oven, so if you see me run away, it's not because I was offended by something people said. I'm just making sure that the food doesn't get burned.
That happened to me the other night, actually. All right, I think these paint a good and broad picture of advocacy. I think it's good also to, a lot of times we assume, we bring our experiences and our perspectives and our definitions to a group conversation, assuming that everyone else thinks the same thing. So I think it's good to name our, these are not necessarily assumptions, but name our ideas so we know what others think as well. So thank you for that. Oops. Okay, so with that, actually, I'm going to turn it over to Chris, who will be talking more, elaborating more about what he began telling us last week about direct service and advocacy. Chris, over to you.
Hello. I wanted to continue with what I was speaking about last time, how policy, direct services, and advocacy are interconnected. At this time of political and social angst, it's easy to overlook some of the positive effects policies have had on direct services and those they serve. For instance, the funds awarded to ACA through the CARES Act, helping many to buy groceries, make rent payments, support other essential needs, has been a lifesaver for many people. And did you know that the gardens at Peace have produced nearly 600 pounds of food this year? Everything from tomatoes, squash, beans, corn to okra, and which was sponsored by FUN, as well as Food for Others, a nonprofit organization that is partly funded by local governments, but is also receiving CARES funding because of the pandemic. And then there's the Locksman House. Just imagine how we might put that to use. I know we might be limited by zoning laws, not to mention opposition from the surrounding neighborhoods, but getting a zoning exemption and changing the mindset of a community are the sorts of things that are within the scope of advocacy. And yet on the other end of the spectrum are the refugee families, like those who attend the Homework Club here at Peace, and which serves as a wonderful example of direct service in action. Unfortunately, despite overflowing refugee camps and a long list of applicants seeking to come to the US, immigration policies are severely limiting the number of refugees allowed to come here. From 2004 to 2017, an average of over 90,000 refugees per year were permitted to relocate to the US. But 2 years ago, that number was cut in half. And then last year it was reduced to 18,000. If only those who devised those policies could spend some time at a place like the Homework Club and see that they need not fear those children and their families who, except for the circumstances that led them to being refugees, are pretty much like their own. That's why, in a way, direct service grounds us and reminds us of the people we are serving and what we are advocating for. A few years back, Monica, Emma, and I occasionally volunteered with Naeem and Nadia at the monthly Alive food distributions in Alexandria. We'd get there early in the morning and bag and sort potatoes, apples, and onions. And then later on, people would line up and pass through the various stations to receive bags of food. You'd see a lot of the same people again each time, and get to know them a little better. And I remember this Middle Eastern gentleman who I'm sure was humbled having to ask for food, but he would quietly go through his bag and pick out what he didn't need or want and return those items to us. And then there was an Asian woman who was a little more brazen, who would barter with us and try to exchange her frozen blueberries for a turkey breast or another loaf of bread. Another woman would come up behind me and plead for an extra quart of cooking oil, and if I gave her one, would ask for another. But I think our favorite was this lady who would pass out scraps of paper to each of the volunteers with poems or proverbs she had written on them. I'm sure I still have a few of them tucked away someplace. But then one week there was a story in the news about ICE agents staking out a nearby homeless shelter and arresting undocumented immigrants as they were leaving in the morning. Up until then, we've been averaging between 125 to 150 people each month. But at our next food distribution, that number was cut in half. I hope I've been able to show not only how policies affect direct services and the people they serve, as well as give you an idea of how advocacy might influence those policies, but also how those services and the people they serve inform advocacy. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Linda Delk of Escalon. Martin Luther said, "To help a man so that he does not need to be a beggar is just as much a good work as giving alms to a man who has already become a beggar." It's not often recognized that Luther was also a social reformer, working with princes in Germany to set up community chests to help the poor and hungry. He believed that the church had a role in holding government responsible for helping people who were poor and hungry. Luther disagreed with his church that persons could atone for their sins through the purchase of indulgences. He also reminded us that Jesus atoned for our sins through his death on the cross, making us free to be people of God. As freed Christians, we can serve God by serving those who are most vulnerable. We worship God when we gather for service in church, but we can also worship God when we come together to do God's work by serving others. Through advocacy work, we focus not only on what people need right now to survive, but also on why they are maybe poor or hungry. Governments exist to serve people. Advocacy is nonpartisan. When people are in need, churches and other organizations can advocate and work with elected officials and policymakers to improve people's lives. Advocacy identifies social justice issues and their root causes, and works to change the system to address those needs. In doing so, we do God's work here on earth. How can we know what to advocate for? Well, individuals and organizations can undertake a discernment process. As individuals, we can pray, learn, reach out to others. As members of organizations and churches, we can do this together. We can pray together, we can reach out together, and learn together to find out how God is calling us to act. And this in itself is an act of community worship. So, how do different organizations discern the issues for which they will advocate, and how they will act? Some organizations engage in research and education activities. One organization that Peace has been involved with is Bread for the World. It is a collective Christian voice urging government decision makers to end hunger here and abroad. The Bread for the World Institute is the research and education arm of Bread for the World. The Institute provides nonpartisan policy analysis on hunger and strategies to end it. It publishes a hunger report every year, focusing on a topic such as inequities in food systems and how that contributes to the root causes of hunger, and then makes recommendations for policy change. Then Bread for the World works to equip people to write letters, emails, meet with members of Congress, work with others to end hunger. Working through churches, campuses, and other organizations, Bread for the World engages people in organized advocacy. Another organization that Peace has been involved with is the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy. The center identifies issues through coalition building with churches and other organizations that have local knowledge of needs in their particular areas. The Virginia Interfaith Center holds annual meetings to poll member organizations and establish advocacy priorities at the local, state, and also federal levels. They then motivate members to become involved in the legislative process by making phone calls, writing letters to elected officials, and meeting with key policy leaders to support changes to improve the lives of marginalized people. And members of Peace Congregation have participated in these activities. Another organization in our area is Virginians Organized for Interfaith Community Involvement, or VOICE. It's a nonpartisan coalition of almost 50 faith communities and civic organizations in Northern Virginia, working together to build power in middle and low income communities in Prince William, Fairfax, Arlington, and Alexandria. They work to unite people from all walks of life to take action on key social issues in the community, such as affordable housing, health care, and immigrant rights. VOICE uses the power of organization to address specific threats, intimidation, or attempts to harm vulnerable people. They recently interceded with renters facing eviction in Arlington, making sure that landlords inform renters of their rights under the eviction moratoriums rather than using intimidation tactics. They have also advocated at the state level for extending the eviction moratoriums and increasing aid to renters. VOICE establishes its priorities through extensive active listening campaigns, research and education, and relationship building. They work not on one important aspect of VOICE is they work not only to advocate for, but to involve and advocate with people in need. All of these organizations engage in some type of community organizing. Community organizing is building organizational power that can speak truth to decision-making powers and advocate for positive change in people's lives. It involves bringing together people with shared interests, building relationships, listening to the issues and concerns of our neighbors, strategizing, and then taking action to bring about change in unjust systems. Jen Landis Santos is with us, and she's had some direct experience with VOICE, which she's going to share with us now.
Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Jen. And the reason I have direct experience with VOICE is because of my husband, Carmelo, who is a pastor and has been very involved with VOICE. So over the years, if you have questions, you can, he'd be happy to answer them also. So picture it. Western Prince William County, October 2017, a Sunday very much like today. However, we were not quarantining. So picture this large public high school, about 1,700 people coming on a Sunday afternoon. Lots of people there with purple VOICE shirts to direct traffic, to welcome you, to hand out buttons, to give out an agenda, to keep things organized. The rules were very clear. We were all knew ahead of time. It was very strict that you could not applaud, you could not boo for the candidates. We were listening to the debate between Ed Gillespie, who was running as the Republican candidate for governor, and Northam, and it was very strict. You could not make any kind of indication. And it was interesting because Gillespie had just recently released a very fear-mongering ad about gangs. And so there were a lot of immigrants in the audience, a lot of Latinx folks, and everyone respected the rules. People did not, they did not cheer, they did not boo. And it was really, really impressive. I was just blown away, really, by the scale of the event, the way it was so well organized. It was so hospitable. And they had, at the end, the candidates, you know, they felt respected, both of them. And Gillespie said, you know, anybody who can get 1,700 people out on a Sunday during a Redskins game has got my ear. And that's the goal of Voice. They want to have the ear of whoever's in the office. They keep relationships very dear. And so they work very hard to be respectful and to build that bond. So that was pretty much the most impactful experience of Voice that I've seen.
Thank you, Jen, for sharing that. It makes a big difference to hear a personal experience. So everyone here may already be involved in advocacy or feel ready now to do something in terms of advocating with and for others. So, and that can be, you may also be involved already in direct service or similarly interested in getting involved in direct service efforts. Different organizations focus on local, state, or national issues, so there's a broad choice about which kind of level of advocacy you feel most called to. And I do think that it is a matter of discernment, of personal discernment, to know where your gifts could best be used. And then it's also, as we're doing now, that's been a big part of our group, our outreach and advocacy group efforts, is a group discernment as a church and as a community and people of faith. Where do we discern our collective call? So while the organizations that we have talked about describe different ways of engaging the community and government and policymakers, all of the organizations do an offering of letters as a way that individuals can get involved with specific issues. And so we're going to go soon to a discussion question, but I'd like to share some words of liberation theologian Gustavo Gutierrez with you before the discussion question. These are his words. But the poor person does not exist as an inescapable fact of destiny. His or her existence is not politically neutral, and it is not ethically innocent. The poor are a byproduct of the system in which we live and for which we are responsible. They are marginalized by our social and cultural world. They are robbed of the fruit of their labor and despoiled of their humanity. Hence, the poverty of the poor is not a call to generous relief action, but a demand that we go and build a different social order. So, as you know, many advocacy organizations are faith-based. So the question we'd like to open up now is, how do you see your faith as related to advocacy? It's a big question. Maybe an opening for that question is, why do you think it's the case that many advocacy organizations are faith-based?
I feel like Jesus was the ultimate advocate and spokesperson for underserved or underprivileged communities, and that's like the gospel is to, you know, help feed the hungry and clothe the poor and give people shelter. And, you know, I don't know, I just feel like that's Jesus's teaching. And so that's, to me, that's why it's not a surprise that a lot of advocacy organizations are faith-based.
The golden rule, which is evident in almost all of the major world religions, you know, do unto others as you would have done unto you, I think is a large part of what makes it a point of common goal and interest and commitment.
Thank you.
I was thinking about this in a different way this week, and it was just because I learned so much about the interrelationship between direct service and advocacy, and it made me recall that many of our church, I mean, we're an immigrant community. The United States is a whole immigrant community, and when I'll just use the example of Lutherans, when they came, they formed groups to help each other, not to build their faith, but to feed their families. And there were Lutheran relief agencies and Lutheran insurance companies and things of that nature that I think evolved as a group. I think as many of the white Protestants became more prosperous, then they expanded to look outward and realized, as Chris said earlier, that relief wasn't the answer, that they had to look to policy changes.
I think for me, one of the things is that I think about the comparison of the covenant in the Old Testament and the covenant in the New Testament. In the Old Testament, we were governed by the Ten Commandments, and in the New Testament, they talk about because we've been saved through Jesus' death on the cross. If we carry that grace, that justification in our heart, then we don't need external commandments to tell us what we do. Our hearts will lead us to the acts that will serve. Again, let us be people of God and do God's work in this world.
I am a preacher without a pulpit, so I'll be careful that I don't speak too much. The outlet to let out my ideas. But there is a very unfortunate distortion of the faith that happens often that makes it very individualistic, as if faith is all about saving my soul so that I can go to heaven. And that is a distortion both of the Old Testament, the New Testament, and Lutheranism. That's only half of the faith. The other half is that because we have been saved by God's amazing grace, we are liberated from the compulsions of having to worry about myself, me. And now I'm free to live my life for the other, for the sake of others. And there are many ways in which we do that. Some of it is you have all described it. Some of it is charity or giving to those in need. Some of it is then advocating also for those, especially those that do not have access or the power, in a sense, that we have. But I think especially in a democracy, as I was saying earlier, it is not just something that we do because it's nice, but a democracy is where we all are supposed to be part of the government. And if we don't advocate, then we're letting other special interests be the ones that define the shape of our society and what the priorities are. And so faith communities, we try to function looking after the well-being of the other, especially the most vulnerable ones in our midst. And I think that's something that I see common across many religions, and voices interfaith. So there are also Jewish and Muslim people involved. And the point is that we are doing this not just for ourselves, but for the sake of the other. So we live out our faith. It's faith acted in love. And then advocacy and organizing is what that love looks like in public. I forget who said that. But justice and advocacy and organizing is just an expression of love in public.
I would only add that I think of advocacy, and maybe this is kind of to echo that, I think of advocacy as an expression of solidarity. And I think solidarity is a word that's easy to say and hard to act. But I think of God incarnate in Jesus being the one who was first in solidarity with us, who came to be God as a human, which is really very remarkable. I mean, if we think about that for longer than a second and a half, it's a miracle. I mean, I think we say the word miracle enough, or we say it about enough things that it escapes how pressing and how urgent and how much that actually means. That God came to us to be in solidarity with us is a miracle. And so, to echo what you said, Jen, about the golden rule and Jesus telling us the greatest two commandments, the second of which is to love our neighbor as ourselves. So that speaks to a mutuality and to solidarity that I think Dorothy Day said, I really only love God as much as I love the person I love least. So if we exist and live in comfort, and yet there are people who are hurting at this very minute that I'm talking, and we are thinking about this, direct service is good, but it's not enough. It's that in the meantime, between time, until we can advocate, as Gustavo Gutierrez said, till we can advocate for a new social order where God's kingdom is evident all around us. The only way I can see how to do that, and I said this a little bit last time in the first session, the only way I can see how to act that or live that is through advocacy, at least in our current kind of social order. Maybe we need to, and I don't discount the fact that it's a very real possibility, we may need to just reimagine the entire social order and live into it.
Can I add one more thing, Nadia? First of all, it's so exciting to see churches doing this, and it makes me so proud to have to be part of Peace. So thank you for doing this. It's very, very inspiring. And also that all the different pieces that are going into it. And I'm so glad that you are leading this, Nadia. I'm glad that the church said yes, and that the synod also said yes to this idea. I think that one important thing that churches often forget, and that we need to keep in front of us moving forward always, is the importance of relationships. So I like the word that you use, solidarity. Often we become so anxious. We're very anxious these days and fearful about what's happening, that we jump into action on behalf of others without having a relationship with those others. And I think that one of the reasons that many people showed up to the event that Jennifer described was because of years of relationship building between the clergy of Voice and their communities. And I think that it is important to have, to take the time to build those relationships, I think at 3 levels. One, with the community that we intend to serve. And they have so much wisdom that we don't, and we should do this together. Second, to build relationship with the decision makers.
I got the oven.
Because they do appreciate hearing from their constituents, and also from faith communities. And then third, relationships within the congregation, people that might not entirely understand why churches are doing this, or maybe people that are really hungry for making a difference and they don't know how. But just emphasizing that importance of relationship building, and that takes time. And it also means being in relationship with people that are very different from us. But in the end, it's very enriching. And in the end, power is relational. Yeah, I'm talking too much. I'm telling you, I'm missing the pulpit.
You're missing the oven.
No, thank you.
Yes.
Well, Jennifer will get it.
Any last thoughts about the relationship of faith and advocacy? All right, Sue, over to you.
Okay, well, thank you.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Sue. I just saw my note to myself, which is good to do. I'm supposed to share with you all a way to navigate to the Peace, Outreach, and Advocacy page. If you should like to find it or go to it, because we have some resources there, as well as last week's videos recorded session, and we'll have this week's as well. So I will share that now with you. So here is the Peace website, and Outreach and Advocacy is this button that says Get Involved Today. And so these will be kind of current things happening. This is last week's video, the crop walk, some other direct service ways to get involved. And then here are some resource links for the organizations we're talking about today, as well as a few more. I wanted to show you all that, how to navigate to this page on the Peace website. Okay, thank you, Sue. Now over to
No, good. That's the perfect bridge, because that's part of what I'm going to talk about, and knowing where to go is so important. So we've just had these 2 sessions, and at least for me, I feel like starting last March till now, I've learned a lot, both about organizations and processes and the relationships of these 2 concepts that we've talked about so much. We know that there's a wide variety of organizations that are active in advocacy, some focusing on the federal government, both legislative and staff people, administrators. We know that there's some focused on the state level, some tend to be more local. But as was asked last week, where do we go from here? So our group is planning what we're thinking of really is a mini listening campaign. I know Voice does listening campaigns out in the community. And there are other organizations that do that as well. But as a starting place, we're thinking of a listening campaign within Peace. And we not only want help, we need help. So we would love to have people involved. And I'm going to talk about different ways to get involved, so you can think through this. But the listening campaign will involve developing questions and then calling everybody in our congregation. And since our congregation is never exactly well defined, people who attend aren't really members or whatever. Anybody we know affiliated with Peace, maybe that's the best way to say it. So, and then so we'll obviously need callers, and we'll need then people to look at the responses and analyzing those. That'll be a way to help direct us, and also a way of relationship building with people we might not know very well within the congregation. Another option of something to get started on is that we've talked about a lot of organizations, and Nadia showed you that list of websites. So I put out a challenge that if there's an organization on that list, 1 or more, that seem of interest to you, just go to the website and learn more about that group. Until I started researching this, I didn't realize that Bread for the World and Bread for the World Institute were in fact separate organizations. They're separate for a tax reason, because the research component, if you donate to that, it's taxable. You can get a deduction, but if you donate to Bread for the World, you can't, because that's an advocacy organization. So I plan to read the 2020 hunger report that's found on Bread for the World Institute's webpage. So look there, find an organization that you're interested in, learn more about it, and then we'll get back together sometime in October and share the learnings, a little more detail about this variety of organizations. So those two areas basically help with the many listening campaign, learning about an organization. And if you're, well, learning about an organization, that's up to you. I don't have to check on you for that. But if you're interested in helping with the listening campaign, which we hope you would be, then just put your name in the chat. And that way we can follow up with you and give you more details of exactly what our thoughts are, get yours, and begin to progress on that. And then I guess I can say that we hope to move on this, beginning in October, which is coming right up. And finally, I can't resist saying, because direct service shouldn't be shuttled off to the side, that you heard quite an important plea from Ron Marie this morning, if you were at church, about the crop walk. So that's on the Peace website as well. And I think I contributed to Ron Walk. I think the way that works is people walk and other people promise to pay them X number of dollars per mile that they walk. Is that, anybody know? Is that how it works? Pretty sure that's how it works. So I do, is that right, Ann? Yeah. So I know I did that pledge to Ron some years back, but I haven't paid attention to it for some time. And it does seem like
get somebody else to walk and can I get somebody else to walk and then,
oh, absolutely.
and then get money for that?
And they can take, oh, did I see a volunteer there on the couch?
You look
Yeah,
really
and that
excited about that.
Yeah, that person can, ask other people for pledges. So yeah, so there you are. Lots to do. And I know we're all busy, but just by carving out a bit of time for this, I think all of us working together can really accomplish something that'll be important for us individually as well as important for Peace as a congregation. That's all I have. It's funny because I'm usually the timekeeper in this group and we have, 12 more minutes that we could talk. But I'll turn it back to Nadia or anybody else that wants to say anything.
Yeah, I think we're open to questions too about either any of the organizations or about Peace's work so far with direct advocacy. Any questions that come to mind really that anyone has.
I have one question for you, for all of you. If there was one resource that our Synod or our church-wide office could provide you with to facilitate this work that you're trying to do, what would that be? What would be one resource that either the Synod or the church-wide office could provide you with that would make a difference?
One thing I was thinking of was, what are other congregations in our Synod doing about advocacy? And just a list of those congregations. That way we could contact them and find out what's going on. For me, that would be interesting and helpful.
That's a good point, Sue, because actually maybe a couple months ago, we thought we'd reach out to ACA because that's, an organization, a group that we already have ties with. And we thought, oh, surely there will be a church within ACA that's maybe involved. I think we were thinking about Voice because they're very local. And to date, I don't know that we've learned of any ACA churches that are involved with Voice in particular. They may be involved with the ICPP or another organization. But so along those same lines, I think that's a good idea, just to be connected to other congregations that we could, they would be a resource, the conversation itself and the learning, we could share learning, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I think in our learning process, it's been very helpful to talk with other people who have been involved with advocacy. Talk with one of the organizers at Voice, we talked with a person who had been affiliated with the Virginia Interfaith Center for a number of years. And it was very helpful to hear them talk about their experience and the approach that the organizations take, and the kinds of questions we should be asking ourselves. So other kinds of help would be, how do we continue? How do we get other people involved? How do we expand this conversation within the congregation?
When to piggyback off of that, when we first started these conversations in late March, early April, we were very quickly, and I think I mentioned this in the first session, we were very quickly like swimming in over our heads in the number of organizations doing community work, who's doing community organizing, who's advocating, which church is doing what are the relationships between this county office and that one, and all these different rabbit holes of learning, which is all good learning, but it's very overwhelming. So I lost my train of thought. The thing about connecting to one of these existing organizations like Voice, again, to use them as an example, is they have the framework in place. Jeremy McClayton was very, he had a kind of a step-by-step process of churches when they're in this time of discernment. Here's what you should do. Here's what I'm going to do. So for another church, let's use ACA as an example. If another ACA church was starting the process we started back in April, maybe it would be helpful for them to know, here's some guidelines, or here's some ideas of how to get a team gathered. Here's some suggestions of what to think about. Just thinking about what we went through and the learning. And of course, you can't substitute anything for actually doing the learning and the discernment yourselves, and each church is going to be different, the context and the people there, but maybe just some, I don't know, discernment guidelines for getting involved in advocacy. And maybe that exists, I don't know. I didn't know 5 months ago to even think about asking something like that.
Chris, do you do screen share?
Screen share?
I mean, I'm thinking of that wonderful chart that you did. And it was do you have it?
I don't have it on this computer.
Right. I mean, Chris put together a lot of this stuff in a chart. And when I saw it, it was like, wow, because it was also learning about how the government works, because you can't influence the government if you don't know how it works.
Right. It was just, a flow chart of the different organizations, that from direct service to advocacy groups to government,
Right.
It just tried to cover everything. And it's been taking me a while because I've got to go in and enter the, contact information for each group.
Yeah.
It's pretty intensive, but I'm still working on it.
I do actually have it, just to give you all an idea. I have it.
Just flip it up for a minute there.
Can you all see that?
Yeah.
That's very neat.
And so Chris, even maybe I can't do it here, but he went in and put contact information, and of course you can see the different ties and connections.
That's really impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
So I guess we could put that up on the website too, just for people's understanding, not necessarily with the contact information, but just like that. I mean,
it's a PDF, so it's easy to share. Yeah.
Yeah.
One other area that I'm interested in is how the Troubling the Waters group, what would interest them, what sorts of advocacy, because we're in a way looking at the same issues, I think. And I think, David, you were in that group. Have you talked about advocacy and what you would do with what you learned from that?
We haven't gotten to specifics, but the general thought is, it's time to act, and what can we do to make the world a better place? And I feel like this ministry is kind of a resource, and we want to get to the right groups and the right people who are doing that kind of work, and would appreciate, or I'm sure all these organizations are always looking for help. So what's going on already, that we could, I don't know what the right word is, but just join or piggyback or whatever. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and we had a racial justice team meeting on Thursday. Yeah, on Thursday. And Nadia, feel free to chime in if I'm sure I'm forgetting some things because I didn't take extensive notes at this one. But I know that we had talked about some actions that we could do. And one of them, I'm just thinking right now, is one of our members is in high school, and she was going to ask her either like student body president or a guidance counselor or a teacher. She was going to try and ask what sort of education the school is giving to seniors who are going to be of age, to vote, and sort of educating them on how do you get registered to vote and how do you vote. And so I think it would be really cool if this group, Outreach and Advocacy, the Troubling the Waters group, the racial justice team, maybe at some point we kind of all put our heads together and think about, because I do agree with you, Chris, there are a lot of, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but there's a lot of overlap, I guess, issues that, I think multiple people in these groups would feel strongly about doing, advocating for.
And if I could say one more thing too, because there are a wide range of organizations and issues, even our congregation is quite diverse. So it wouldn't surprise me if we don't agree, this is the organization we're going to join and we're all going to focus on this. I'd be surprised if that happens, but I think it doesn't matter as long as we have some continuity of purpose among ourselves. I mean, I, for example, happen to be very interested in the federal level. Maybe some others say, well, no, the grassroots is for me, and so forth. But I think that's okay. As I said, as long as we have this, commonality of goals and interests.
Ardell?
One of the things that, the question of what would be useful, it'd be nice to have a survey of all of the churches in the area to know what are they doing about advocacy. Some may be at the very beginning, say, well, we're thinking about doing something, but we haven't really gotten anything together. There'll be the other extreme. We're all active. These are the things we're pursuing. And I think it would be kind of helpful for us to kind of look at it. Maybe we can team with some other churches, or maybe learn from a lot of their experiences where they're finding very positive areas forward and where they are running into a lot of resistance. But a survey, I think, would be of benefit to the congregation as to what other churches in the area, how they are approaching it, or at least to what level they're approaching it, not necessarily all the details.
Thank you. Those are great ideas. I'm meeting with Bishop Ortiz on Wednesday, and I'll make sure that to share all those ideas with her. You should know that even as congregations are trying to figure out what to do, bishops and the churchwide organization, they're also trying to figure out how to support congregations in this work and what to do. And I am a newcomer to this group, but I can tell that you are all ready for action. And sometimes congregations can be a little bit timid about transitioning from discerning and studying to acting. But it seems to me that that the times are right and that this group is ready to go. And there will never be 100% agreement or unanimity. But I do think that, and the way the voice works, for instance, because that's the one that I know, usually it's not the whole congregation that is involved, but it's a group within the congregation that is interested. So it doesn't have to be all or nothing as you move forward. I think that's all I have to say.
And we always talk about action, let's get going, let's do something and so forth. But I recall what Ann Murphy, who is a volunteer with Virginia Interfaith Center, said when she was speaking to us. She said, advocacy, and John Lewis actually said the same thing, advocacy takes a long time. You have to keep working on it and working on it and working on it, and you don't expect to see results because you have a great idea. It takes a long time. So I think we're going to have to learn patience as well. Not that we shouldn't be acting, but just.
Nadia was quoting Gustavo Gutierrez, the liberation theologian, and that way of thinking emphasizes that there's always a movement between acting and reflection on that action. So you always engage in action and then also pause and you reflect on that action in the light of the gospel to make sure that you're being faithful and that your actions are having the results that you want. And so it's both and, right? You engage in action that is thoughtful, prayerful, according to the values of the kingdom of God. And then we pause and we ask ourselves and our neighbors, like, how is it working? And then we go back. So there's an iterative process there, going back and forth. I am also a professor without a classroom these days. So I'm sorry, I enjoy teaching.
You're just
preaching.
No, it's very helpful, Camilla. Thank you. We like to hear everybody's voice.
Okay, so it is 2 o'clock, just after, and I think next steps, we will, Jen and Natalie, thank you for volunteering to help with listening, and we will reach out to you with next steps for that. Any final thoughts or words or questions before we pray? Would anyone like to volunteer to close us in prayer? Pastor?
Sure, I'll be happy to. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Gracious God, we thank you for this opportunity to gather together with people with a common sense of passion for being about your work in this world and in this community that is hurting so much and they're so divided. We pray that through your Holy Spirit, we may find the direction in which you want us to go, and that you take our actions, our intentions, our ideas, and multiply them and unite them with those of other congregations and other peoples, so that there can be healing in our midst. We commend all these things into your hands, together with all the things that we may have in our hearts, all the anxieties, all the health concerns, relationship concerns, everything that is worrying us within us, we put into your hands, trusting in your amazing grace, in your love, and in your wisdom. In the name of Christ, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
If you turn off the recording, I'd say something to everybody.